I'm Jen Shaw. We spend our days helping employers sort through messy workplace situations, often in real time and often with a lot on the line. On this podcast, we'll walk through those issues, what's coming up, what actually matters, where employers get into trouble, and what to do next. No theory, just practical guidance you can use. Today, we are going to talk about a really important topic, employment references. I've had a lot of questions about this recently, so I want to jump in. Before I do, I want to remind you, if you have not registered yet, spaces are filling up for the Employer's Lawyer webinar on June 2nd, Getting Investigations Right, a California Employer's Handbook. We're going to talk about everything investigation related. You know, the last couple of months, we've had a lot of podcast episodes on investigations. There are a lot of cases coming out, court decisions that are coming out on the importance of effective investigations. And Joe Beachboard and I figured we need to do something nice for everybody on this podcast. And we want to give you a free webinar. So go register. Space is limited, June 2nd. You can register at employerslawyer.com/investigations. Get registered and we'll see you on June 2nd. All right, everybody, let's talk about references. I think this is one of the most interesting areas of sort of employment law, workplace practice, right? I talk to people who say to me, I would never give a reference. All I do is name, rank, and serial number. I do not want to get sued for defamation or slander or libel or anything, right? I just don't want to have anything to do with it. And I talk to other people who say, well, I always give a reference because if somebody's a good employee, I don't want them to not get a good reference, and I feel like they should get a good reference. Of course, there's a really good argument that if you give a reference, you're sticking your neck out unnecessarily. You don't owe anybody a reference unless you have some sort of separation agreement with them or some sort of settlement where you agree to give a reference. Otherwise, you can say, our policy is we don't give references. That's not what I prefer. I got to be honest. I see the value in having a bright line rule and saying, I'm not giving references, I just don't do it. Sorry, you're going to have to go somewhere else. But I feel like it's a responsibility that we have as employers, right? We need to be working together. If you've got a good employee, I want to know they're good. And if they worked for you and they weren't good, I'd like to know that too. So our sort of practice here at Shaw Law Group is we give references. Sometimes they're not great references. I'm surprised sometimes when I get a call and an employee who doesn't work with us anymore has mentioned me as a reference. And I'm thinking, that's interesting because I let them go, for example. Why would they give me as a reference? But I always tell the truth. Hey, they were really good at this and this, and they weren't so good at this and that. And if they ask me, did you fire them? If I did, I say yes. And if I didn't, I say no. I'm very transparent when it comes to references. Now, I suppose I'm taking a little bit of risk with that. But like I said, I feel like it's our obligation. It's our responsibility, right? Part of that is because if you happen to have an employee who has engaged in wrongful conduct and somebody calls you and you don't tell them about it, right? There's a very important case called In Re Randy W., which is a case involving a janitor at a school who was accused of some inappropriate criminal conduct with some children. And there wasn't enough to indict him, to charge him. So he didn't get charged and he went on to another school. Then he was accused of doing the same thing at the new school. And the old school, when asked for a reference for this guy, said he's great, he's lovely, because they got somebody on the phone who liked the guy and felt like the guy did a good job. Never mentioned that there'd been a huge investigation and the police had been involved and it was all crazy, right? So of course the new district hires this guy and then sure as heck, he engages in the conduct. Now the second school district is suing the first school district saying, hey, you owed us a duty. You knew there was a problem. And you affirmatively misrepresented this guy's history with you, right? You affirmatively said he was a good employee. Now, part of the problem is that school district did not have a practice of only having one person give references, right? Or making sure that only a limited number of people were doing that so that it would be accurate. They happened to get somebody who really liked that guy and they gave a really positive reference, but they were speaking on behalf of the school. They created liability for the school. And the court said that the first school could be sued by the second school for those misrepresentations. So when you know somebody's done something wrong, you could say nothing, okay? And there's a way to do that, right? Hi, Jen. Hey, this is Matilda. I want to get a reference on Pauline. They were an employee you had a couple of years ago, and I'd like to know, how things went. Well, Matilda, we don't give references here at Shaw Law Group. I can confirm when Pauline worked here and their job title and their compensation, but I can't give a reference. Okay, well, Jen, tell me this, Matilda says. Would you rehire Pauline? And here's my response. Well, there's an answer, right? I don't have to say another word. Matilda better get that clue and say, I'm not hiring this person. That's the way it works. Okay. The other way to do it is to say, no, I would not rehire this person. There is what's called a qualified privilege for that kind of a statement. You can't be sued for it as long as you make the statement in good faith and you have a legitimate reason why you wouldn't rehire the person. So when you think about references, I will tell you when I hire people, I tell them, I'm making you a conditional offer. It's conditional on you passing a background check or a drug test or whatever I'm deciding to do at that point, and that I can talk to somebody and get an employment reference about you, at least one person. And if you can't get me a reference, you're not coming to work here. So when those candidates work for folks who won't give references, they go find me a reference. And then I talk to that individual and say, well, who else should I talk to? So I can sort of run it down a little bit. That is really a good practice. I feel like I have found out a lot of things by calling people and then calling the people who they tell me to call. And I just don't feel confident in an hour or two long interview process that I'm going to be able to figure out whether this person is any good, right? Whether they might fit here. And I have even hired people where I got a negative reference when I could understand or figure out what happened sort of under the radar, right? So for example, I had an attorney who applied to work with us and gave him a conditional offer and said I needed a reference from his current supervisor. And he said, I can't give you a reference from my current supervisor. We don't get along. She and I have really butted heads. I feel like she doesn't know the law. She doesn't try to research it. She doesn't try to be a good attorney. Now, I don't recommend saying any of those things in an interview, right? But I said to the guy, all right, well, I'm going to talk to that person. I still want to talk to that person. And if you want to come to work here, you're going to have to let me talk to that person or somebody else at their same level. So he finally said, okay, go ahead. Well, when I'm talking to this person, I can start to get a sense of what this kid has been dealing with, right? And I'm thinking, I wouldn't have lasted with that person either. So I made the offer and the person was here, oh gosh, I don't know, 5 years, like great lawyer, went on to do great things. I didn't just say no because I got one negative reference, right? I dug a little deeper to figure out what was going on. Somebody who has experience with your candidate is the best person to help you figure out if your candidate has a chance of making it, right? If they're going to be a good fit for you. So I think it's a really good idea to do references, but you have to do them in the right way, right? So as I said, in California, we have what's called a qualified privilege. It's located in Civil Code Section 47C, and it protects you when you're just truthfully answering questions like, would you rehire this person? Now, there are a number of risks if you don't follow this process in good faith, right? So for example, if you don't usually give any references and your policy is we don't give references, but you really can't stand someone who just quit And so the minute you get a reference, you want to spill everything. And you just spill it all. Even though you don't give references, you spill it all. Well, now you've treated that person differently. Potentially that's retaliation, depending on what the circumstances are. If you're not telling the truth, if you exaggerate, you say it was worse than it was, or they missed this many days of work and it's not really accurate, that's a defamation issue. Of course, you have negligent misrepresentation. So if somebody asks you, would you rehire this person, and you think, I don't want to get sued, so I'll say yes, even though the answer is they were picked up for shoplifting and I'd never hire them here. I'm in a retail store. I'd never bring them back. You got a problem. That could be seen as negligent or even intentional misrepresentation. So when you're talking about the reference policy or practice that you want to adopt, remember there are 3 options, right? Option 1 is no references. I don't give references. It doesn't work that way. The other thing you can do is what we call neutral references, where I'm not going to give you a substantive reference on Matilda, but I will tell you the dates she worked here, her title. I'm going to give you that much information. So you can at least confirm that she told you she worked here, and in fact, she did work here. And of course, that helps reduce your potential liability. It's easy to standardize. On the other hand, it's a little less helpful to get a neutral reference. The prior employer isn't really telling you much. And it could hurt stronger employees, right? If they are walking on water and all you're going to do as the employer is give them a neutral reference, that's going to really hurt somebody who worked hard for you, which is not really good karma, to be honest. Okay. Your other option, of course, is to give substantive references. So you talk about performance, you talk about strengths, you talk about weaknesses, you talk about whether or not you'd rehire them. This is, of course, very transparent. It supports employees. It supports the employer community. There is a little more risk, but not a ton. And you do have to be consistent, right? You have to have a protocol. The more I work with people on these kinds of issues, policy issues, compliance issues, that sort of thing, the more I'm really convinced that you just have to have things written down. You have to have policies. You have to have procedures. You have to be consistent, because that is where things can go wrong, right? When you don't have consistency. So it's true, there are arguments on both sides here. There are arguments to give references, and there are good arguments not to. If you decide you're going to give references, here are a couple best practices I want you to think about. First of all, please stick to the documented facts, okay? So, for example, if you haven't done an investigation, you don't know what happened, you don't want to opine about what's happened. Now, if you saw it with your own 2 eyes and you know what happened, that's different. But be very careful that you're only relying on documented facts. Make sure that your leaders, your managers, your supervisors know what your policies and practices are. What should they be saying? What should they not be saying? Make sure you're not giving any feedback to the prospective employer based on rumor or speculation or supposition. Be very careful. This is somebody's career here. You want to be very responsible in the information that you're sharing. And it is important to centralize the process, right? You don't want to have happened what happened in Ray Randy W., where you have a situation of somebody giving a reference who did think the person was a good employee, didn't know about all of these other issues, and it didn't go to the person who actually had the most information. That is always going to be a problem. So those are the things I want you to do if you decide you're going to give references. Even if you decide you're not going to give references, or you're only going to give neutral references, I want you to be consistent. You've got to document your reference requests and your responses. And I don't want you to have any of these off-the-record comments or providing a, quote, personal reference. Whatever you say to that prospective employer, they may rely on, and they can use that to come back and say, hey, I relied on you to give me good information about this applicant, and you didn't do that, right? So I want to make sure that we're very clear about what is happening. What are the expectations? And your employees should know this. And in fact, I'd put it in your employee handbook. We don't give references. We give neutral references. We give substantive references based on, facts that are confirmed or reasonably confirmed. So there are a lot of different things you can do here. But I think the worst thing you can do, honestly, is just decide you're not going to give any reference at all. It's really not fair to your good employees. And most of our employees are good. In my 20 years of running this law firm, almost 20 years, I cannot believe that, 20 years. Okay. Whew. All right. In my almost 20 years of doing this, I've had a handful of employees who just haven't done a good job. Everybody else has just been great. So everybody, here's the thing. We work with employees. They work hard for us, okay? We're a team. We work together. We try to do our best. We try to serve our clients, our customers, our vendors, our patients, whoever they may be, our students. We owe it to those folks. The least we can do for a hardworking employee who's been with us and come to work and done what we ask them to do is give them a reference, wish them well, help them find another position, or don't be standing in their way when they have a prospective employer that says, I got to have a reference. You don't want to be the one standing in their way. So it's much better to take the approach, look, I'm going to give references. I'm going to be transparent. I'm going to be careful. I'm going to make sure that I only speak the truth and only speak facts, but I'm going to do it because I owe it to them. It's part of our responsibility in HR to be willing to do that. And even if you're not in HR, you're the owner of the business, you're the COO or whoever you are, when you have a good employee and you treat them well, even after they've left you, that is really good for the universe, right? That is good for you. That is going to come back and help you no matter what. Thanks for joining me here today. Great to have you here. Just final reminder, go to employerslawyer.com/investigations to sign up for the webinar, Getting Investigations Right, a California Employer's Handbook, and I will see you next time. Shaw Law Group, we solve workplace problems. Real-world guidance for real workplace decisions. The Workplace Wake Up podcast is produced for general educational and informational purposes only. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not constitute legal advice or create an attorney-client relationship. The law is complex and constantly changing. Therefore, you should contact an employment lawyer in your jurisdiction for advice regarding your specific situation.